Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome to this final workshop. One date you all have to keep in mind is November the 30th, which is when COP21 will be starting, and then there is January 1st, 2020, which is when RT20 will apply, will become enforced for all new buildings. As we're going to see, some buildings are way ahead of the others. We have the example here of a positive energy tertiary building. 4 guests are with us. Alexander Cartier, hello. Hello, you're the technical director at Green Office at Bouygues Immobilier. Green Office, that's the green tertiary building branch. Yes, it's actually a brand which is owned by Bouygues since 2008. It's a positive energy building, nothing more. Régis Roland, good afternoon. You're head of Aventis, which is a joint venture between Bouygues and Schneider Electric. And you were a building manager, is that correct? Yes, that's it. I'm a building manager. In order to manage the energy of a building, design is really important. Um, Operating the building correctly is important. Educating, explaining how the building is working to the people occupying the building is important, and we decided to create a company to do this. A company that does more than just building, constructing the building. Okay, Sophie Jaillet, hello. You're head of PR at Unilever France, and you are the users of the building. When did you enter the building? We've been in it for a year. Okay, so we'll get your feedback. And last but not least, we have Mark Bakapsa. Welcome. You're an asset manager with PTZ Investors. Tell us a little bit about what you do. Well, we are investors, we're asset managers, which means that we represent the owners of the building. Okay, very good. So much for introductions. Um, let's start about how it all started, and then we will discuss the assets of the building and green or positive energy buildings, generally speaking. Last but not least, we will then talk about the building today, which is in Roubaix, get your feedback, and maybe we can turn to the future. Alexander, tell us a little bit how it all started and give us some of the milestones. It started when Bouygues Immobilier developed a 35 square meter project. This was a few years ago. In July 2011, there was a major tender through Unilever they were building their new head office. So we were part of the tender, and we ended up getting the contract. We asked for a permit in December 2011, and it took us 2 years to come up with the building, to erect the building, which was delivered at the end of 2014. It's a large building. Half of the building is occupied by Unilever. The other half is another company. It's Ingérop and American Express Travel. Okay, so you said it's a positive energy building, which was really something you wanted. At what point did you decide you were going to make this a positive energy building? Because back then there were no enforced regulations in this area. Why did you make that decision? Well, it occurred to us in 2008 with Martin Bouygues, and at the time of the so-called Grenelle de l'Environnement, a new environmental legal framework in France, we decided to take the initiative. We started off with the Meudon Green Office, 23 square meters, which was the very first building, which was a very successful one, as a matter of fact. And following that, Bouygues decided to trademark the concept and develop new buildings, positive energy buildings, to really make a competitive difference from other construction companies. And we created a business case quite successfully. Okay, very good. So much about the starting of the project. Régis Roland, as you said, you were a building manager, so you managed the building. At what point were you contacted? Was it when the building was inaugurated? Was it during the construction of the building? What was the timing? Um, the building was designed before the company even existed. I was doing some work with Bouygues Immobilier in general and Schneider Electric. And we decided we were going to have a small dedicated team working both on the design, the actual construction. We wanted to make sure that we wouldn't miss anything. The technical considerations, of course, everything related to utilities, the commissioning. That's the commissioning part of the project, which was important. And of course, what we wanted was on day one, when the building would be occupied, to have a fully positive energy building. So we were there all along the process, and we're still there now. We operate the building, and we make it happen. We deliver. We have a contract. Okay, so it is contractual. Absolutely, we have a contract. So we have to make sure that everything's happening to stick to the contract. Okay, Sophie Jaillet. We just talked about the bid for this new building. What was your ambition? What were your requirements? What were your specifications at Unilever? Well, Unilever has very strong environmental commitments as a company. We have an environmental program and plan. We're very active in sustainable farming, for example, and in a number of other areas. And the company has taken very concrete, factual measures in these different areas. And one of the chapters is well-being at work. Therefore, we decided we've tried to develop buildings that meet all environmental standards around the world, not just here in France or in Europe. We were quite determined. And again, with the upcoming COP21, and we knew that it simply made sense for us to take strong commitments in terms of sustainable development. Not doing it costs a lot more than doing it. So it was really important for us, and subsequently we decided to set up a team, and here we are. So tell us about the employees. How do they like it? Are you getting, quote unquote, more out of them? Are they performing better? Are they working better? Is that something you've been able to measure? Well, I think we innovated twice, really. We moved from the old office to a green office. We already had an open space, but today we have what we call a flex desk system, which means that all employees working in the head office have their workstation, they have their desk, but they do not have the same one every day. It's a moving system, which they have territories and teams within the company, and when you show up at work in the morning, you can sit wherever you want. And that's a major innovation, which means at the end of the day, you use less paper, less storage. We do sorting, we sort the waste, for recycling and so on. This is really where we were very adamant about. And looking back now, hindsight, I think we've been really true pioneers. Okay, so we'll come back to the comfort of the building. Mark, you are the investors. Could you tell us a little bit more about the investment process and why this was also innovative? I represent two life insurance companies, major players in France, and these companies generally buy real estate, several billions of euros invested every year in real estate, and with the environmental situation today, a lot of their assets are obsolete, and having new buildings, modern buildings, environmental buildings, is something really important. So having a green office building in their portfolio is a very important asset. We would be better off if we had more, but it all depends on companies being willing to rent this kind of buildings. Okay, I think we now have a better picture of the project, the building. Let's go inside. I think hopefully we can get some pictures of the building. Alexander, back to you. Tell us a little bit about how this building compares to other buildings that are out there. Well, to make a building energy positive. You want it to be low consumption, as low as possible, that is. So with our different teams, we tried to identify highly innovative technologies and solutions. I won't go into detail, but we have a decentralized air processing mechanism, which means that air is delivered directly to the people inside the building. In a standard conventional building, we have a huge air processing unit which pushes air. Whether you have 1 or 1,000 people inside, you push air. We push air only where the people are. We call them individual air units, and they're based on probes, presence and air quality probes. So we only deliver air when there is someone and where someone is. So that's a big improvement. Then we use the natural resources on site. 20 meters below the parquet, we have a table, a water table. And we were able to use this for geothermal, as a geothermal source of energy. We can pump, we can reject. We have a given flow up and flow down. And we use heat pumps, heat pump technology with different performance coefficients. And with this, we were able to substantially reduce the consumption of energy. And it gives the building a fairly standard temperature. 20 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, which is very, very low. Okay, so you said the 3 main principles: consume less, consume better. I think we will talk about this again with Regis, and produce more, right? Yes. For positive energy, you have to produce energy. That's the concept, the very concept of positive energy. We immediately decided to use the roof for where we have a metal frame with 400 square meters of photovoltaic panels, and this is how energy is supplied. Okay, consume less, consume better. Also, tell us a little bit more about the better. What does that mean? Well, this is something you can obviously only do if the people who are inside agree. So we have literature which has been made available to the employees, to Unilever employees, in order to use the building as wisely as possible. It's really important to educate and explain how they can consume better. And of course, that's where guaranteeing energy performance comes in as well. Okay, Alexander, I have one more question for you. In terms of design, do you think designing a building like this is more complex than a standard building? Yes, it is. If you want an energy positive building, yes, it is more complex from a design standpoint. However, we're striving to reduce the amount of complexity. Technologies are becoming simpler, which is a good thing. And with this, we have best practices also, we have experience now, and we're trying to simplify things. This will be interesting going forward for future buildings. Question for you, Regis. We talked about the performance. You're the manager of the building. How difficult is it to manage the building, and how do you make sure that it does deliver energy? Does it produce energy? Well, we're with G and Bouygues. Our guarantee was to have a given amount of consumption and production from day one. 20 kilowatt hour of consumption per square meter. So we monitor things, the consumption very closely. Of course, everything is based on a scenario. We make sure that the scenario is what's happening in reality, which requires a lot of communication back and forth with the building, in the building, Unilever, that is, again, to explain. Okay, blinds are moving. Why are they moving? Some buildings are very technological. We can't really put people inside. People are, it's a building that moves, and we are an energy manager, which means that we make sure the right technology is used at the right time, at the right moment, and that's how comfort is created for. So this is the management. It's done with software, and we have commitments. We made commitments, and therefore we have to. We try to make them human buildings. and we don't want it to be scary. We don't want the technology to be scary to people. Some of our work is very complicated. We have to do a lot of things proactively. We generally work for the next day. You have to anticipate what will happen the next day. So we need to communicate with Unilever employees, and we have to tell them, for example, when something can change. Okay, Sophie, Mark. You obviously don't communicate only when there is a problem. You obviously have an ongoing dialogue, more so than in conventional buildings. I would say so. Yes, I think we have a long-term commitment and partnership. There is value for investors. Investors have a long-term vision. But we are here to deliver long-term services. And again, we try to work very proactively. The technical maintenance is done in a different way. We do a lot more communication. As I said, sometimes we have to take corrective action. We need to make sure that things are done well. Sometimes you have to communicate to anticipate something. Sometimes we have employees who go to a given floor to tell people that it's going to be warmer outside, and therefore we would appreciate to get your feedback. All this we do with Unilever's management. And of course, I don't claim we're getting it all right at the first time, but I think so far we've done a fairly good job together. Okay, well, Sophie, tell us if that's true. How are you involved in this dialogue, and what are your objectives as a company, as the company that is occupying the building? I think we have a project team. The project team has Unilever people from with Regis's team, and Bouygues. I think we actually put that team together a year before we took the building, and that was a good thing. That was a good thing to do, because when we finally took the building, the team knew each other, and I think that this was an important prerequisite, having this ongoing dialogue before taking the building. My job was to work with employees, get them ready for this new building, which came with a lot of changes. The building itself, considerations such as temperature and so on. When we moved into the building, it was on December the 12th. We had a very short time frame to move, and to tell you the truth, we were cold. The first months were rather difficult. It was cold. It was cold in the building. We actually had to wear gloves at work. Okay, but then you had this ongoing dialogue. Well, we did, yeah, we did, and I think they were very good at listening to us. We were able to come up with solutions, and when something was wrong, employees would also share. Sometimes when something goes wrong, people don't communicate. They get very upset, but they don't say what's wrong. In this case, people did share, and again, we had to be to respond, of course. And when our employees saw that Regis's team was going around the building, we're there to listen, take questions. Put yourself in the shoes of an employee. You walk into the building in the morning, you see the blinds going up and down. All of a sudden, it gets really cold in one corner. There is power supplied available for 20 people. If you're all by yourself, you have to wave your hands up in the air if you want light. But at the end of the day, it's for a good cause. It's to lower our impact on the environment. And when people understand that, they're fine with it. So are you concerned about the upcoming winter? Well, I think we're sponsored by Canada Goose now. No, I'm just kidding. No, seriously, we had a great summer, and it has gotten a little cold during the winter months. The bulk of the outside surface is glass. So we were a little concerned about the heat during the summer. And before that, we were in a building where it got very hot, and we had a great summer. The summer was absolutely wonderful. Okay, Mark, heading over to you. You are you have different interests as an investor. Um, what's important to you in this dialogue? What were the important stakes for you?
Propriétaire. Well, as the owner, our interests align with that of the tenants. Our interest to have tenants who stay as long as possible in the building. So we signed a contract with Unilever for 9 years, and what we're doing right now, we're present. Although we've signed the lease, I'm on the site personally. My teams are there with Regis and Unilever managing the building. What we want is to make the tenant happy, to make them stay as long as possible. And when we meet again in 8 years to discuss the lease again, we want Unilever to take into account the history of the 9 years that they've spent in it. Although at the beginning the startup period was a bit difficult, it was a first winter that was cold, but it was okay in the summer, and I want them to be happy with the building, and we want them to stay longer in the building after the lease is up. So we want to be present in the building to do some coaching because we're present with a building manager. We do some daily coaching for everything to be smooth. We're here to grease the cogs to make it run smoothly. We are talking about a lot about Unilever, but it's complex because it's a multi-tenant building. We have 3 tenants, Angirop and American Express Travel. We need to make the relationship smooth with Unilever and also with the other 2 tenants. It's teamwork, and it's working quite well on the building. And where are you involved? We're involved also in the relations between the various tenants. Since Bouygues Immobilier only wants one thing, the Rouet Green Office, to be the flagship of their green strategy. They're present to make it run smoothly. Avialt is also there. So our interests converge to make the tenants happy because, as I said, at the end of the day, it's difficult to find tenants on the current market, and we want to make tenants happy with the building so that they do some promotion about what we do on a daily basis. Now, we've been around the premises. We've got some feedback already, but I would like us to round up this to wrap up with that. The building was completed in December 2014. We talked about the exact date. It's now October 2015. Maybe it's too early to take stock, but what's your view on these first few months of occupancy at Green Office Rouet? First of all, the first year when you deliver a building, it's always the commissioning year. When we delivered in the winter, and so there are half seasons. There's the summer season, which is quite a big climate change when you go from heating to cooling. And so although it's not the user's problem, but for us as a developer, and that's part of our communication work as well, the first year is always a commissioning year and a completion year. But when you walk around the building, you feel that all users are happy to be there. When you talk with them, when you're at the cafeteria, when you have a chat with the people from general management, it's really a positive feedback. Yet, there's still some work to be done. A word about Green Office Meudon, which is an older building. Maybe you've got some more history about what happened there. Meudon was delivered in July 2011. The first 3 years, the contract was fully fulfilled because over the first 3 years, the building was labeled energy positive via CSTB. We commissioned CSTB so that the data that we would provide got the seal of quality from CSTB. So the first 3 years, now this is the 4th year, the first 3 years were energy positive. The tenant was really happy, and for us, it was also a great flagship. Regis, same exercise. What's your view on these first few months? Your observations? Well, I'm also looking at my portfolio too, because I have a promise, I have a contract with rewards and penalties, so let's talk about money. Now we're taking stock after almost 12 months of operations, and I'm here to guarantee that the building runs well based on assumptions with a certain temperature level and a commitment on the consumption levels. Like every other building, we lived with high reserves. What we could do on the energy front was a first estimate of the impact of some reservations that were lifted after a while, and so we realized that after 9 months we met our energy target with a slight lag. That would be a fine-tuning phase to understand how it worked. So the tenant won't pay that cost. Aveltis will pay. Overall, we're happy with the result. It was a technological achievement. We got great engineering firms and contractors working on that, especially for geothermal energy. And now there were a few slips here and there with the de-snagging phase, but after 9 months we've met the target, and this building is still very comfortable. When you talk to Unilever, with Unilever people, they're really happy with it. It's less easy to put a figure on it. It's a high-performance building from the energy and environmental point of view. What about comfort? It was eco-designed, as we said with Alexandre. For instance, working on natural lighting, working on the thickness of the walls to get the best possible environment. We also worked on things that have to do with soft comfort. The guidelines are that there won't be any temperature shifts within the building. That's important for the workers. When they walk into a building, the climate environment will vary softly during the day. They won't be caught by surprise. There may be variations according to the floors, that's for sure, but this may be something new because in traditional buildings at present you don't have such an environment, so you need to get used to it. It also takes some explaining. Unilever had to explain that to their people. So maybe with hindsight, these comfort aspects are fairly well received by employees. That's the feedback that I also got about that. Sophie Jaillet, is life beautiful at Green Office Rouet? Yes, life is indeed beautiful there. There's been the whole de-snagging process with a number of things to be completed, but it also takes time for employees to own the building. We haven't talked about lifts that are very intuitive, that are smart lifts, so that when you go and take a lift, you select your floor, and then everything is calculated by itself. So we've got better flow management to avoid congestion. There are a lot of things that people are discovering as they live in the building. Getting natural lighting too, that's absolutely exceptional. It's good for morale. You've got natural lighting in all offices. That's fairly rare. It's also soft lighting. Equipment is good quality. I talked about temperature. This is really something that a tense topic, but from the moment that you're two in a building, two in an office, anyway, you're going to fight about temperature, but in an open space environment, it's even worse. But yes, really, it's a great endeavor that really raised awareness about the environment amongst our employees. We observed it ourselves. We conducted a survey about pride, the pride of working in this building, and we got high scores. There were over 80%. They are committed to sorting, printing less, being careful about how much water they consume, all these different gestures that become absolutely necessary if you want things to change for the better and for the climate. This is almost the end of this discussion. We'll pass the microphone around if you have questions, but I had one question for everyone, starting with Marc. Marc, in the future, could this type of asset still be interesting for buyers? Is there a demand on the market for this type of project? For this type of asset, we buy about 600 or 700 million euros worth of assets a year. It's difficult to find assets, and assets are obsolescent. So when tenants leave, either you need to refurbish or sell off. So in the future, if we had a building like Green Office and a tenant of the quality of Unilever, we would buy this asset very quickly. There's a lot of demand on the market, but it all depends on the tenants. If they have to leave obsolescent buildings in order to walk into new buildings. Regis, same question. In the future, is there room for improvement on buildings like Green Office? Have you got any innovative ideas, not just for Rouet, but in the absolute? Well, with Bouygues Immobilier, we launched into developing green offices to address societal change. Green office also strikes a chord with young workers from the moment that they're aware about these solutions. In the future, we'll offer more and more such solutions. Technology also changes very fast. And so in the future, we'll need to add a human touch again to these buildings and simplify the technological management. So yes, of course, in the future, there will be room for green office type buildings that will be managed better and better with more technology and also many more services. We've gone from the technological era to an era based on services to make it more human. What type of services are you talking about? Well, of course, concierge services, which are now developing across the board. You may not be so familiar about community facilitation, creating events on the floor or in a team to break with the daily grind. And so in a day, there are 6 or 7 cycles, moments when you need to focus, to make phone calls, to do some teamwork, and moments just to relax. And so special events let you connect with your own pace again, and that's what office life will be about in the future. So really putting people at the center of buildings will be what we'll do in the future. Alexandre, I was talking about 2020 in my introduction. We may not go so far, but where is still room for innovation in Green Office? In the Green Office catalog, there are 13 achievements, 3 already delivered, 5 or 6 ongoing, and the remainder to be built. The Green Office of the future will tend towards low carbon. A current Green Office building is very technological, a lot of concrete for a lot of inertia, and so the carbon balance is not great. We want to tend towards low carbon and a wood structure Green Office. We're doing something in Batignolles with the first Green Office in Paris that will be timber frame. It's not just aesthetic, there's also a life cycle analysis aspect. Yes, over the duration of construction, green offices are very virtuous after construction, but when it comes to construction, because of the intrinsic characteristics, the construction carbon balance is not very favorable. Does that mean that a building like Rouet that we're talking about as a groundbreaking building, very innovative, may that be the standard in the future? Well, de facto, because of RT 2020, all new builds will need to be energy positive buildings. So that's why Bouygues Immobilier is now ahead of the curve. Maybe we'll be able to talk about this timber frame green office in the next workshop, but now we have time for a Q&A, only 2 microphones. Are there any questions from the audience? Right here on the first floor. And hello, I wanted to know regarding sustainability. You talk about the long term, but long term is also deconstruction and refurbishment. Are there any projects about that regarding reuse of materials? Alexandre, as part of our construction modes, of course, we think about the whole operation and we calculate the carbon balance over the total life cycle of the building. All the materials used are reusable. We'll work with diverse products like aluminium, wood from certified forests, concrete. Where we could be slightly criticized is about the PV panels, because the life cycle of PV arrays is slightly complicated. The supply chain needs to make progress there, but apart from that, it's okay. So we're really thinking about all the materials that we're implementing. It would be nonsense to have a green office that would be the best in environmental protection by using absolutely obsolete materials. Great. Another question? Sir, Good afternoon. I wanted to know, as part of the consumption that you're talking about, is it the theoretical regulatory calculation at 19 degrees temperature? But given the uses, maybe you had to revise the operating temperature. And how do you discuss it with your employees? What temperature they have in the home and what temperature they have in these high-performance buildings? Maybe first Régis and then Sophie. Yes, indeed. When we develop such an operation, there's a first calculation when we don't know who the tenant will be, where we make assumptions. Like everyone, we use assumptions based on the regulations. But now we have contract-based approaches. When we sign the contract, in the computation engine, we have assumptions that are as close as possible to real-life situations in the building. So we talked to Unilever when we talked about the contract with them. We said that 19 degrees, it's a non-starter. We can't use only 19 degrees. We went to 20 or 21 degrees. And at Bouygues Immobilier, we have software to adjust the consumption level based on actual assumptions. I know that there are places where you want a bit more heat in the nursery, for instance, where 20 degrees just isn't enough. We meet the 26 degrees in the summer, but this is no longer the regulatory calculation. It's as close as possible to the life of the building with its tenant. And this is what's in the contract. But we meet with a certain scope of uses. Here there's the RT scope of uses. Some uses cannot be modeled or difficult to model. Server rooms, we don't know how they'll operate, so they're taken out of the guaranteed scope. But then we can offer an additional service. Once we've got a year of data, we can make calculations. It's not RT calculations. This is a thermal simulation computation that's fairly accurate based on real-life situations. Of course, there can be exemptions, and if you want a different temperature level, we can use new assumptions, different openings for the building, and so on. Have I answered your question? And there's still communication with employees. Yes, thanks again for this answer. What is the temperature level in the contract? Coming back, it's fairly constant in these modern buildings, these issues of perceived cold. That's something that you usually find. And so you need to have a dialogue with the user, what temperature is acceptable for them, and how they manage their employees, whether they accept to work in these temperatures. The legal temperature in the summer is 26 degrees, and we raised it to 20 degrees apart from specific locations where the temperature is even higher. But it took time for employees to get used to it, and so we even went to 21 degrees in the first few months. There were issues with reservations, and so we increased the temperatures a little bit so that Unilever people could also make the building their own. It takes a lot of explaining when you move into these new buildings. Sophie, I would just add that in terms of communication, it's important to manage expectations, because when employees start bringing their own thermometers at the office and saying, look, here it's X degrees and here it's Y degrees, it's important also to have a dialogue with them. And I'll say that again and again, since your teams walked around the premises giving explanations to employees, that really helps diffuse some situations, reduce the concerns, and it went smoothly. I think there's another question. Good afternoon. And there's another one after that. 2 questions for me. What of the 2 lines, heating or air conditioning, is the biggest energy consumer? And then second question, we know that in office buildings, a large part of consumption is due to IT equipment. Have you calculated this consumption to calculate that with what's in the regulations? Have you made specific efforts in this area? Who would like to answer? Régis again, or Alexandre? Maybe Alexandre, for starters. Regarding consumption, the biggest consumer is lighting, actually. And then heating and air conditioning, since we use the aquifer for geothermal. Given the energy strategy, they're almost on par. So the biggest consumption line is lighting. And then about IT, as part of our thermal simulations, in terms of waste heat from computers, well, that's fully embedded in the calculation, where we make commitments on the RT, so-called RT uses. And since computers are not covered, there's no guarantees on waste heat from computers. Just an addition, on a bill of 100 in the contract, we don't guarantee the whole amount for a simple reason. At some point, if you want to give guarantees, it needs to be based on economic realities. There shouldn't be too many provisions. And for some users, you can't really forecast when you design the building the consumption level. But the purpose of a company like Avaltis, we've got all the meters in the building, and so we can measure everything that's going on. Now, tomorrow, this is something that we'll do from next year onwards, we'll provide a service extension on the regulatory part that's already covered by the contract. We have commitments and so on. For the rest, we'll take an independent view at how it all works, and we'll discuss it with the tenant and the investor to offer services to bring it all under control. And of course, technologies are changing based on the type of computer. You don't have the same consumption. But looking at the life of the building over a year with the different uses on things that are hard to forecast, in a year and a half, we'll be able to offer something to control it all, to extend the guaranteed scope. We have a few minutes left for one last question, and then we'll need to leave. Sir, I'm Raymond Zarian, retired engineer. Thanks for giving me the floor. I'm an amateur speaking to professionals. I wanted to know whether outside the condominium rules that I received in a building that I received 30 years ago, in the new documents, is there a maintenance log, logistical support over 30 years and so on? And is there something about the perfect way of living in the building as imagined by designers without imposing things on occupants? Is there a preferred way of occupying the building? And I have other questions, but you probably can't answer them right now. Is what we did 30 years ago irreparable now? My building is all electric, and I think that in the future, when the guardian retires, we won't be able to manage it. So is it possible to reconstitute documentation that should have been drawn up by the building companies when we built hundreds of such buildings? That's a question for the future. Who's an expert in that? Alexandre, about the first part. Well, with the lease, it takes a lot of discussion to draw up a lease. So besides the lease, there's everything that defines the building permit and a description note. And in this description note, there are the operating principles that define how the building runs. And of course, the user can do whatever he wants. And also occupancy assumptions. And it's also based on these operating principles and assumptions that we've calculated the 20 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And then about your question about 30 years ago. Well, sir, I think that your question has to do with housing. It's true that controlling energy consumption in the home is a separate question, because the contract that we signed with Unilever is committed to say that if it's 26 degrees in the summer, there's nothing I can say. I can't criticize. Maybe I can ask for a little less, but I'll pay for that. That's not an approach that you can have with residential occupants. But there's something else. You can do some education for recent buildings that were delivered recently, where there are notions of high energy performance, for instance. You install computer tablets explaining how the building behaves in terms of consumption. You consume that much in the kitchen with this or that equipment. You'll consume that much in the bedroom or in the living room, so that you're free to make your own choices. Is this level of consumption something I'm okay with? And if you're okay with it, okay, right, but maybe you could do something more by using your washing machine differently. But coming back to equipment installed 30 years ago, there's probably some refurbishing to do. I think you'd need to change a number of things, and repairing what already exists may be a sort of an illusion. Okay, maybe we can discuss it outside this room, but our time is up. Thank you to the four of you for discussing Green Office Rouet. Next time we may meet in Rouet to see how actually comfortable this building really is. Thank you to the Bouygues teams who helped me organize this talk. Thank you for attending, and if you're there tomorrow, see you at 11:45 for another conference about Nanterre Cœur de Quartier, which is a sustainable district. It will be interesting too, and we'll talk about energy amongst other things. See you, and good evening.